Ladies and gents, it's Preacher! And today we're going to talk about the secondary stats, particularly the amount of effort that Blizzard is going to make us care about readiness and multi-strike and these new wonderful things we're going to get to play with in Warlords of Draenor. Unfortunately, there's not enough of that stat flying around in Warlords of Draenor at the moment in order to me to give you some sort of direct feedback on how it feels, how it plays, am I noticing a gameplay difference, all that kind of stuff. But why? Why? There's a common question that I'm being asked a lot right now is why is Blizzard so heavily focused on answering questions about this stat? And this is actually the basis of one of the problems of these introductions of new secondary stats. I think the question we first have to ask is, did we need new secondary stats? I have to say no, I don't think we did. In a world where we're no longer allowed to reforge and gem and pick and choose our secondary stats and buff one considerably more than the other in some fashion, adding two more to the mix makes it a lot more muddy. Did it need to happen? No. Did we need to throw more paint into the pot and see what happens? I don't think so. We're relying on boss drops from this day forward. We're relying on whatever we get, and we don't get to pick and choose. We don't get to say, oh, well, you know what? One stat is much, much better than the other one, and we can then gem and sort of focus that item that way. They seem very contradictory to then add two more to it. But, okay, we're adding two more to it. Let's see what's going. Why is there so much focus on them? Blizzard's... I hate to say this, but it does feel like Blizzard fucked up a little bit here. The problem is, we're going to a stage of the game. Bear with me here, right? This is the line of thinking so far we've seen from Blizz with Warlords of Draenor. We're going back to basics. We want people to pick up items and know it's an upgrade, right? It's going to be an upgrade and you can slap it on straight away. For the last couple of years, or last couple of expansions, let's say, I always consider expansions in terms of a year. That's wrong. We've been focused on the idea of we don't want the math guys to need to do too much in order to decide whether an item's an upgrade. Blizzard's openly said we don't like it if you get a new item and the first thing you do is have to go to a website to weigh up its stats or stick the numbers and tweak Ask Mr. Robot or whatever it is to see whether or not this item is an upgrade. It should be flat out and clear and simple and easy to use. Anybody who's just picked up the game to anybody who's been playing for 7 years should be able to pick up an item and go, that is a nice big upgrade. They did that quite simply by increasing things like strength, agility, intellect. They made it so it was like, oh, well, they're just clearly flat out more of that stat, therefore this is probably an upgrade. And we got quite well on with that. This multi-strike and readiness is a real counterintuitive way of acting right now. It seems very hypocritical. It doesn't make any sense. Why? Because these stats aren't easy to understand. Haste is easy to understand. Things go quicker. It's not hard to explain haste to someone. Oh, you cast more spells, you cast more spells and your global cooldown's faster and it's pretty easy. Crit! Who needs crit explaining to them? Really? You don't need, oh, you crit more. Well, can you explain that to me in detail, friend? I need some more information on that one. And when it comes to mastery, that's already the oddball. Mastery generally just increases our damage done. Great. Boring. Right? In most cases, mastery is pretty boring. It's a pretty dull thing that just does something passively in the background. We have no control over it. We don't get to decide whatever it does. It just increases damage or increases healing or something along those lines. But we don't actually feel a gameplay difference. When we have a ton more haste, there's a noticeable gameplay difference, yeah? We do things much quicker, we can feel our character growing in strength. So you pick up a fresh level 90 and then you play a level 580 level 90 who's focused on haste and my god, you're in an entirely different world. An entirely different world of how that character plays and it feels good. Our character at the end is clearly more powerful. If we pick up a character that's focused on crit, Fury Warrior, or Fire Mage, you pick up a fresh level 90, then you get one that's geared and looking towards a lot of critical strike chance. My god, that class plays differently. It's insanely more powerful. The entire way the buttons you press, everything you do with that character is totally different. Totally different, thanks to our secondary stats. Mastery, not so much. It's kind of the black sheep. I have much less of an affinity for characters that focus on mastery, like assassination rogues. I prefer to have mastery haste items because I do things quicker and so on and so forth. So what Blizzard's trying to avoid is a repeat of the armor penetration situation. For those of you who don't know, we had a secondary stat once upon a time called armor penetration. It was just flat out what it sounds like. Sounds pretty easy, but it worked on percentages and all that kind of stuff, and it was a little bit awkward. And frankly, it wasn't very powerful when it came into the game. During Wrath of the Lich King, it was actually pretty shitty, and people tried to avoid it. Around about Ulduar, they buffed the crap out of it, and everybody got armor penetration. But gameplay never changed. Gameplay never changed. It just stayed the same. You got 100% armor penetration, and then you focused once again, like we normally do, on our other stats, which are kind of more interesting: haste, mastery, and crit, and whatever, because now we have our passive stat doing what it should do. Couple of questions then. Should secondary stats have an effect on gameplay? I think that's an important first question, and I believe the answer is yes. Why? Because our main stats have no effect on gameplay. So our secondary stats should be something extra and interesting and cool. I kind of think that's the way it should go. I know I hit harder when I have more strength. I know I do more spell damage when I have more intellect. It's very easy, simple stuff. I know I benefit from a basic standpoint when I increase my main stats, just like in any RPG in the world. But then we start looking to the secondary stats to make our characters fun and interesting and interactive and change the way our gameplay goes. I don't expect to do anything particularly different by being stronger with a two-handed weapon other than hit harder. I don't expect that to happen. So our secondary stats, I always believe, should have some sort of effect on gameplay that is rather noticeable as our character progresses, and it gives a truer, in my opinion, sense of strength and journey and growth in that character. It really does. But being stronger doesn't really make much of a difference. Our numbers are higher, no doubt about that, but in terms of how the game plays, it's pretty much exactly the same. If you just got items that just gave flat-out strength increases, you would have no difference between a fresh level 90 and a level 90 covered in 588 gear that just gave strength, other than your numbers are hitting harder, which is kind of boring, right? There's no real sense of progression in that curve. So Blizzard's trying to avoid that, which is what happened with armor penetration, which was swiftly removed, and try and make these stats more interesting. Now, the feedback is, one, it's too complicated. This looks like it needs a lot of maths thrown at it in order to work out whether or not it's a benefit. On the flat-out basis, if we take multi-strike, it's just a damage increase similar to mastery. We're not going to notice those multi-strike ticks or dots particularly. It's not going to be something that we're like, oh, I'm multi-striking the shit out of this target. Not particularly. It's not really going to go down that way because the numbers will be far lower than the initial spell. It'll just drift into the mire, similar to how things like immolate dots tick into the mire, and compared to the Chaos Bolt crits, you're not looking at the immolates and going, ooh, look at that 700 there. Wow. You're not really doing that. So multi-strike will fade into the distance. So they don't want that because that's just similar to mastery. It's just a flat-out damage increase that's passive. We have no control over it. We can't pick what spells it does with. So they're trying desperately to make you give a fuck about multi-strike. You will care about this stat, says Blizzard. It's kind of a wrong attitude to take in a world where we can't pick and choose. Look, you can't pick and choose what you do with your stats, which kind of sucks. So we're going to make you care about it. That's what we're going to do. Because you can't decide whether or not you want more of it. We're just going to make sure that if you do get it, it's really, really good. Don't do that. Let's pick and choose. If we want to do some funny multi-strike builds, we could do that in the past. We can't do that now. It also runs the risk of making the stat far too powerful. If you're forcing it on us, because multi-strike will, of course, the big hook, as they're calling it, is that it will cause more procs and do more things, because your spells are attacking more often, so there's more chance of things happening with multi-strike. That's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. I'm okay with that. It's got something going for it, but you're forcing it. Really, really forcing it. It has to be subtle. It has to be something that's like, oh, that's quite nice. Not the case of, I just need any item with multi-strike on it. God, please give me more multi-strike. Please. And then because there's so much focus going into multi-strike that every character's feeling the same way. I want haste to be as important. I want crit to be as important. I want there to be an opportunity to mix and match. Maybe there will be. Maybe there won't. The kind of similar response is coming from readiness. Readiness is like the big tank dealio, although I think it suits DPS more often. But they're trying to make tanks care about readiness because your gear will have readiness on it. Your cooldowns will be shorter. And the tanks have replied with a common sense approach. I only use my cooldowns when I need them. And if your encounter is designed around having a cooldown sooner than I can possibly have it again, then we will just get enough readiness to make that happen and then we won't care about it. Because tank cooldowns don't work that way. And Blizzard's really shouting from the rooftops. He's like, you're going to care about readiness. It's going to be so cool. You're going to have all your cooldowns. I don't need my cooldowns like that as a tank, Blizz. And you should know that. Okay? Let's talk common sense here for a moment. You have something in that encounter that is designed to have a cooldown used on it. That's how the game works right now. Because other than that, I can just be healed through it using my normal active mitigation methods. So you have something that happens in that encounter that needs a cooldown, pretty much. Okay? Good? We clear? Okay, Blizz. So if you just say, well, my cooldown's usually 3 minutes and now I need enough readiness to get to 2.5 minutes because when that happens, I will just make sure I get it down to 2.5 minutes or whatever it might be. And therefore, it's not that interesting. It's just a stat I have to get, similar to like a nature resist. Essentially, it's no different than that. I need X amount of nature resist, and from that, I can go on and do whatever I want to do. I don't need to make it any shorter than that because that's when this thing occurs in the encounter. I don't need it any longer than that because it wouldn't work. Simple as that. It's not interesting. It's not fun. I just have to have it. And Blizz is really, really trying to not have these things be boring. But in doing so, it seems to me like they're making them more difficult. It certainly seems like we're going to have to throw math at it. In the case of the tanks, it's going to be like, well, you need X amount of readiness, perhaps, to deal with this encounter. Okay, so we just need to get that amount, make sure the gear drops, because I can't reforge to it. I can't go to Reforge Light and say, I need blah, 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 blah amount of readiness. Can't do that anymore. I have to rely on what you're telling me. And hopefully it's going to be okay. Similar with multi-strike. Is multi-strike itself going to cause less damage, but the procs are more interesting? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that, right? If the math turns out is, yeah, well, they tied so many procs to multi-strike, and the way it works is that, you know what we need to do? You need to have X amount of multi-strike to make sure these procs go off, because that then leads to a kind of damage increase in some other way, and you really have to go it roundabout, and it's not that interesting. But multi-strike itself, it's okay. It does its job, but what it doesn't do is make you feel more powerful, really. I mean, procs are cool and everything, but they're nothing like having constant permanent faster spells or just generally more crits. I can see why people are having feedback problems, but there's also the feedback is people are fine with it. New and interesting stats. There's pros and cons towards these secondary stats. I'm just not sure we needed them. I'm not sure what benefit we're getting from having them. Readiness could be really fun. That actually has some form of gameplay changing ability. Kind of cool as long as it's not tied to encounters. Maybe in PvP it's going to be much better. Multi-strike though, the one that's really getting hammering. Blizz is really saying you will care about multi-strike. If I'm going to care about it, that feels like you're putting too much into it. That feels like you're going to make it too powerful. Because if I really, really care about it and you're forcing the stat down my throat, what kind of results are we going to see from that? Are we just going to have this stat that you regret putting in the game? Do you already feel like maybe you didn't need to do it? I don't know, man. What do you guys feel on the basis of it? As soon as I can test this, I will. But at the moment, very confused why we're putting something that has a needless complication attached to it in a world where we're trying to simplify everything. All right, guys. Bye.